If you had the choice of getting either 20% buffs or 20% debuffs, which would you pick? Hi, and welcome to Red Evony. I am Akayasha, and I am a firm believer that debuffs are more important than buffs. And I'm here to preach that good news to you. In fact, you can call me Preacher Aka. Can I get an amen? Amen. 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 Yes. Now, in my opinion, putting all other considerations aside, I firmly believe that getting 20% debuff is better than getting 20% buff. You might feel differently about it, but as I said, I'm here to preach and make you converted to the point where you believe in debuffs as well. Now, that's not to say that buffs are not important. Oh no. Buffs are very important. We are talking of comparison between buffs and debuffs, which one is more important. That's what we are talking about. So, let me lay out the case for you, okay? And throughout this video, you can take notes of any of the points I'm making and feel free to debate, argue, and discuss with me down in the comments. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the chronology of your Evony journey, okay? The timeline on which you run as you play Evony. Now, when you first start out, everything is about buffs. You're looking for buffs for your mounted general to kill bosses. You're looking for buffs for your ranged general to get you into PvP. Your whole mind is fixated on buffs. Then, when you get to around, let's say, K33, and you get the opportunity to start making Achaemenid gear in your forge, then the mindset switches to debuffs. And that is where you will start seriously trying to increase your debuffs. And you'll do that with the forge, crafting Achaemenid gear for your generals. You'll do that in your academy, doing research as well. Now, given the recent changes in the way we play the game, this is probably the point in time where you might start thinking of getting T1s. But I will tell you my firm and honest belief that investing more time and effort into getting your debuffs is going to be more beneficial than cranking out T1s. Argue with me if you will. That's honestly what I think. Focus on debuffs as opposed to T1s and troops in general. One thing I have told people before is that your troops will protect your keep, but your buffs and your debuffs will protect your troops. So, before you start cranking out troops, it is important that you invest a lot of time in your buffs and, of course, your debuffs. Then, as you get bigger from that stage, debuffs start playing a very important role for you in PvP. And that is something that cannot be understated. Then, eventually, you get to a point where you are too big to solo. For most people, okay? If they want to attack you, they have to start thinking of rallies, okay? You've gotten to the point where you are too big to solo. Now, at this point, your focus will likely shift a bit more to the buff side, trying to get more buffs for your keep. But that is only possible when you have a good foundation of debuffs to support you. And of course, at this point, you will probably have started upgrading your gear from Achaemenid to Parthian. And also optimizing your sub-generals so that you can get more debuffs. Okay, case in point. If we look at my sub-generals, I've got Hojo Ujiasu, who is the upgraded version of Andrew Jackson. So, at my level, I'm looking at switching out one of my Andrew Jacksons for Hojo to get more debuffs, of course. And those kind of considerations are the things that you should be going through at this stage. And in fact, I personally think about debuffs all the time. Okay? They're constantly on the mind. You can call me the cookie monster of debuffs. I'm thinking of that sweet stuff all the time. So, based on the chronology of how you develop, you get to the point where debuffs are the major thing that you should be focusing on, and that debuff base is going to support you throughout the rest of your Evony journey. They will form the backbone of your defense, and in some cases, your offense as well. So, debuffs are that important. And another important point you need to note is that debuffs are actually harder to get than buffs. You can check it out in your academy. You can check it out with your sub-general gear anywhere you want. It is harder to get debuffs than it is to get buffs. That's also part of the reason why I consider them more valuable. Now, with that being said, let's move on to two other important topics that we need to talk about when we're doing this discussion of buffs and debuffs. The first one we're going to talk about is attacking. For attacking, you will likely get to the point where you might be feeling that the importance of buffs outweighs debuffs. You will feel like that when you're starting off, and then later as you develop, you will also feel the need to increase your attacking buffs. However, when you've progressed in your game up to a certain point, that switch to increasing buffs for your attack is already supported by a foundation of debuffs that you have. You will have your sub-cities that you have gotten debuffs on. You will have your research that you've gotten debuffs, and that gives you the freedom to push your buffs forward as much as you can. And in fact, to even push that point further, you get a lot of debuffs for attacking in the game. Okay? If we go to the military academy and we look at these things here, these have attacking buffs, but they all come with debuffs. As you can see here, reduces enemy mounted troop HP by 30% when attacking. These debuffs are attacking debuffs. Once you get to the point where you can do the military academy, you get a ton of attacking debuffs. And not just that. If you come to your monarch, if you have these things here, these all provide debuffs only when attacking. So, if we look at my attacking preset here for ground, right? You can see that I have this one on there. And this one gives enemy range troop attack minus 23% when attacking. So, if you spend a bit in the game, these will give you certain debuffs when you're attacking. So, your attack is always constantly supported by debuffs, which allows you, in my opinion, to be able to increase your buffs to a certain stage. So, for attacking, I would say that there is a good balance between the importance of buffs and debuffs. I think they are equally important when attacking. Now, we move to defending. And when you talk about defending, in my opinion, the importance of debuffs becomes much clearer. Now, of course, when it comes to defending, increasing your buffs are important. Okay? No question. But I would argue that increasing your debuffs for defense is much more important than increasing your buffs initially. Why is that? Let me use myself as an example. That is because most people that will attack you, or me in this case, will have high enough attacking debuffs that they will debuff all my defensive buffs down to the maximum. I have shown this in other videos that I have done, and it is the reality for me. Anyone that looks at my keep and is strong enough to attack my keep has enough attacking debuffs to debuff all the buffs in my keep. So, for me, when I'm looking at buffs defensively, the way I see it is that if, for example, I get the opportunity to increase my buffs by 2%, that is effectively a 1% increase in buffs for me. Because whatever I increase those buffs by are going to be cut in half when I'm doing PvP. So, 2% increase in reality is a 1% increase in buffs for me. And of course, most of the times, the person attacking me is going to have higher buffs than I do. So, the more debuffs I get, the more I can cut that attacker's buffs in half, and the better for my situation. So, in most cases, a 2% increase in debuffs is exactly what that is. A 2% increase in debuffs. And in most cases, I will get the full benefit of that increase in debuffs. This is also the situation when it comes to rallies. The people that are setting rallies on you will have high enough buffs, without the subs included, of course. So, when it comes to rallies, you should actually be looking to have the advantage on debuffs over the people that are attacking you. And that's why I firmly believe that you need to focus crazily, hungrily, in fact, on getting as much debuffs as you can. Within reason, of course. Okay? I consider myself a debuff gourmet. Alright? I'm not just going to pick up any crap that Evony throws because it has debuffs in there. No. I'm selective. I have class. Okay, all kidding aside though, one of the major points that people raise during this argument of buffs and debuffs is the debuff cap. Which means that because you can basically only debuff half of the opponent's buffs, you eventually get to a point where you have more debuffs than you need. While the train of logic for that argument makes sense, I don't quite agree with the final conclusion of that argument. Why? Because the nature of Evony is that buffs increase at a faster rate than debuffs do. There are so many things you can get buffs from your save gear, to ascension, to specialties, to blazons, to save treasures, to monarch gear, so many things that you can get buffs from. But sources of debuffs are comparatively limited. That is why, for example, you can find a player that has 3000% attack buffs. But I challenge you, find a player that has 3000% debuffs on anything. If you try doing that, you will notice that it is much harder to find the debuff player. I suspect that there will be a few around, but not many. But at the stage of the game that we are at now, a lot of people have 3000% attacking buffs on one or more of their generals. In fact, some of you listening to this video right now have 3000 attacking buffs. Yeah, some people will have that. But I can also bet that you don't have 3000% debuffs on any of the stats. So, this glorious rant that you've heard me go on in this video is practically the full case for why I believe debuffs are more important than buffs. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Which one do you think is more important and why? Now, some of you watching this video will still be at the point where you are struggling to get your debuffs as high as possible. Some of you will still be struggling on cranking out that Achaemenid gear. So, if you check out this video here, you will see a challenge that I went through to get Achaemenid gear as quickly as possible, and that should give you some motivation to be able to crank out the gear as quickly as you can so that you can defend your keep with all your power and all your might and all your troops and stick it to that guy. So be sure to check it out. That's it for me, guys. Thank you very much. Aka signing out.